correlation has been made to wrestlers as real-life superheroes, because while they're in the act of professional wrestling, they can seemingly defy gravity and overcome all odds, much like a superhero would. And this is where the line in the sand is drawn as far as professional wrestlers being more than just actor stuntmen. It's the fact that even in real life, they can truly be superhuman and become real-life superheroes themselves. And I've got 10 examples of them doing just that. Shibata was born in 1979 and made his professional wrestling debut in 1999. He came up through New Japan Professional Wrestling, and over the course of his career was an IWGP Tag Team Champion, as well as a 3-time Never Openweight Champion. And his career was at the peak with a win in the New Japan Cup in 2017, which led to an IWGP Championship match against Okada. After the two had an amazing match, Shibata collapsed backstage immediately afterwards. He was then rushed to the hospital, where he found out that he was suffering from a subdural hematoma, which was basically a huge bleeding thing in his head. Shibata was famous for using his head as a weapon throughout his career. Complications from this also caused him to lose feeling in his right side for a certain amount of time, and it was pretty clear that the man had just cheated death, and the furthest thing from thinking about was actually wrestling at some point in time. However, just a mere 4 years later, it would seem that somehow, some way, Shibata was able to fight his way back. From there, he has returned full-fledged to the ring. Of course, his style has been altered, but it's nothing short of amazing to go from the brink of death to back in the wrestling ring. We all know and love John Cena, and back in 2007, we were in the middle of the C-Nation hype. Cena was everywhere, and of course he was the guy for the WWE at the time. On October 1st, 2007, Cena tore his pec in a match against Mr. Kennedy. John Cena finished the match Triple H style, which was superhuman enough, but this was in the beginning of October, and well, the Royal Rumble was just about 3.5 months away in the dead of January. On average, this injury was known to keep wrestlers out anywhere from about 6 to 8 months. I believe this is the same injury Cody Rhodes just had in recent memory, and he was out about 7 months. So to just give you some idea of how superhuman John Cena actually is, the legend of Cena returning to the Royal Rumble in 2008, way before anybody even expected. And of course, after such a super heroic return like that, entering in the match at number 30, Cena of course had to win, and he'd end up wrestling in a 3-way match for the title at WrestleMania 24. You either know her as Saraya or as Paige. Came up the hard way through 6 years of indie work and global work. She then spent another couple years in NXT before becoming an even bigger star on the main roster in around 2014. Her run was pretty good, but it's considered that it was pretty much cut short just a couple years into it. In June of 2016, she had to take a sabbatical due to a neck injury. She returned to action about 15 months later in December of 2017. Sadly, she was only about a month into her return before she got injured again. That was the point where her WWE career came to an end. As far as in-ring work anyway, Paige was under a sizable contract and would be held under that contract for a significant amount of time. WWE has these things in the contract where a lot of the time, if you miss the time due to injury, they will then just tack time back on. So from 2018 to 2022, they would use her in various roles, whether it was as an announcer, as a manager, as a general manager, and then finally that came to an end in 2022, and she pretty much immediately signed with All Elite Wrestling. We had heard rumors from about 2020 to 2022 that she would have been able to wrestle, but the WWE system was just not allowing her to. She officially officially returned to the ring for All Elite Wrestling and looks to have made a miraculous recovery from what was thought to be debilitating injuries to the point to where she could no longer wrestle. While she's not getting in there and doing it too often, she is getting in there and doing it, and that to me is superhuman and coming back from the impossible. Bret Hart was a celebrated professional wrestler for over 2 decades, and by the year 1999 was of course a huge star, multimillionaire contracted wrestler for World Championship Wrestling. Well, here came Goldberg with a hard, errant kick to Bret Hart's head, causing him a severe concussion that he continued to wrestle with for a few weeks, and that was sadly the end of Bret Hart's in-ring wrestling career. For a guy that was so celebrated, so decorated, for it to end like that was truly tragic. He would go on to have more and more complications with his head throughout the years. It's thought that there's a correlation between the stroke that Bret would have at an early age, and you pretty much thought at that point that it was a done deal. Another hero, lucky to have cheated death. Well, not so fast, pal. Insert Vince McMahon, and if there's a way to do business, you're gonna do business, and Vince McMahon found a way to do business once again with Bret Hart in 2010. The idea was to have Bret Hart come back. He sows his oats with Shawn Michaels and wants to mend bridges with everyone else, but Vince McMahon wasn't having none of that. So we were finally going to get a long-awaited showdown, a rematch from the locker room in Montreal 13 years earlier, Vince McMahon versus Bret Hart at WrestleMania 26. So a lot of people were interested in exactly how this was all going to shake out. Well, it turns out with a lot of smoke and mirrors, a lot of outside interference, Bret Hart was actually able to return to a professional wrestling ring and was actually able to vanquish Vince McMahon. This match is amazing to go back and watch. I think that they hid the fact that Bret Hart couldn't really do much very, very well. Bret does take a couple falls in the match that make you really cringe for a second. Bret Hart exercises that demon in Vince McMahon. At the end of the day, on the grandest stage of them all, Bret the Hitman Hart returned from the absolutely impossible. The man they call Sting had a much decorated career, capturing our hearts in the late 80s and holding on to it all throughout the decade of the 90s and even into the 2000s. Some of us followed him into TNA wrestling where he was doing stuff, and the question was year after year is when would he be coming to the WWE? We had many teases of it throughout the years. We thought we were going to get an Undertaker versus Sting match at WrestleMania several years in a row. None of those things ever happened, but finally in 2014, ice was broken between Sting and the WWE when he had signed a deal to be on the WWE video game, and from there the gates opened for an in-ring wrestling return. This led to him returning at WrestleMania 31 in 2015 to face Triple H, a match he somehow lost, but that's a whole nother story and that's not what we're talking about here. No, we're talking about 6 months later at the Night of Champions pay-per-view where he was challenging Seth Rollins for the WWE Championship. For whatever reason, they had held off for a whole 6 months before doing anything with Sting again. And in this match, a matter of circumstances would lead to Sting with a neck injury. He gutted through the match, but that was pretty much it. It was pretty much a done deal with him in the WWE at that point. And it was thought that he would never wrestle again due to his age and the nature of the injury. Well, about 5 years later in 2020, he starts showing up in All Elite Wrestling. Sting's had a handful of matches in AEW and is slated to wrap up his career there in early 2024. Nevertheless, during that 4-year period, he proved that he was superhuman and came back from the impossible. Shawn Michaels had a dedicated career throughout the 80s and the 90s, and when he rode off into the sunset in 1998, you could say that he rode out on top and by his own rules. It is believed that in January of 1998, at the Royal Rumble, during a match with The Undertaker, Shawn Michaels suffered a lower back injury. This injury would keep Shawn out of the ring for a couple months, but at WrestleMania 14 in March of 1998, he gutted it out, gave a hell of a performance against Stone Cold Steve Austin, where he dropped the WWF title. Shawn Michaels wouldn't have another match again for another 3 years. The talk was going around that Shawn would never be able to wrestle ever again. Now, the wrestling community is pretty much divided between the two things. You have folks over here that say that Shawn was never injured in the first place. You have folks over here saying that Shawn was just waiting for the right time to return to the ring. At the point in time where WWE was going to absolutely need him most again, which would have been right when he returned in the summer of 2002. As in the year prior, they had just bought in WCW and miffed the invasion angle and so on and so on, so they needed something. He made a return for a small show for his wrestling school, and from there he decided, hey, I think I can go ahead and do this stuff again, and made his official WWE return in August of 2002 at SummerSlam in a street fight against Triple H. He was WWE champion again just 3 months later. Someone that once again returned from the impossible. Stone Cold Steve Austin officially became the biggest star in wrestling somewhere around the year of 1998, and he rode that for the next 4 years through mostly ups with a few downs. In 2003, he finally called it a day and wrestled what was thought to have been his last match at WrestleMania 19. Years and years of bumps had caught up to Austin and his neck, and from there he hung it up in an official sense. Of course, his personality and star power superseded anything he could do in an actual match capacity, so WWE had no problem bringing him back in many different roles throughout the years. For a while, they gave him a semi-permanent role as a general manager of Raw. He was also the go-to guy for a lot of their stuff throughout the years, whether it was hosting Tough Enough or podcasts or etc., etc. In 2022, though, it finally happened. WWE was finally able to talk him into having a match, which was something that was very unsure for a lot of people by reports even going into the day of the show. Austin had agreed to do the segment with Kevin Owens at WrestleMania where they would have a confrontation, but the confrontation was never billed as an official match prior to the event. Of course, the confrontation led into an actual match that was had, but that moment did happen. The confrontation did escalate into a match, and you could actually call it a match. More so than what Bret Hart had done at WrestleMania 26, Stone Cold and Kevin Owens brawled everywhere around the arena, and while the brawl itself was a lot of smoke and mirrors, Austin still got dropped several times on his back and around his neck, which would make any knowing fan gasp while it was happening. But everything turned out alright in the end. The good guy always wins, just like superheroes do, because Stone Cold said so. He came back from the impossible. Bryan Danielson was born in 1981 and made his professional wrestling debut in 1999. Became synonymous with the Ring of Honor brand in the early 2000s, and that's where he became a major star before signing on with the WWE. And there were very tumultuous times there. His first little bit was spoiled by the Justin Roberts tie choking incident, where he was briefly fired and then brought back a couple months later because the fans pretty much demanded it. And from then on, his whole WWE career was a movement where the fan base just refused to let them not support this guy. Every time it seemed like the WWE system was pushing him down, the WWE fans would fight back for him. And this rose his star to the point to where in 2014, he was finally able to capture the WWE Championship in what was a monumentous storyline with the Yes Movement, which was all very sad sadly cut short. Just a couple months into his run, Danielson was flagged by the WWE doctors with concussion issues. And from there, basically he remained in WWE's concussion protocol for the next few months. He would then return right up through WrestleMania time in 2015, and just a couple weeks later was put on a shelf again by the WWE doctors. And that time he remained in that protocol for around 3 years. They used him as the SmackDown general manager for a couple years of that. It was thought that due to these head injuries, he was never going to wrestle again. But in 2018, Bryan overcame the impossible and returned to WWE rings full force as a full-time competitor. Bryan Danielson, Daniel Bryan, whatever you want to call him, returned from the impossible. The Nature Boy Ric Flair. The man needs no introduction. The man needs no backstory. We all know who Ric Flair is. We all know what he's accomplished, which is many, many things throughout the years. Thought of by many as the greatest of all time, and it's definitely one that's hard to argue. Well, the years of styling and profiling had finally caught up to him, and he was basically on death's door. This all happened in 2017. Even though he had made super heroic returns throughout the years, we all thought that it was finally done for the Nature Boy, but he proved us wrong in 2022 when him and his podcast associate decided they were going to promote Ric Flair's last match. He wrestled one more time in a tag team match, and even though Ric himself admits that he passed out during the match, not once but twice, and even to the most untrained eye seemed like he was physically laboring during the whole thing, still the fact that he came back from all of that to make any kind of a return into the ring, I think is damn near impossible. A superhero looking as strong as he could. Let's rewind back to the year 2018, and yes, Roman was even reigning back then. Been a long time, hasn't it? And then in February of 2019, he shows up on Raw and announces that he has leukemia and that he's taking time away from wrestling, possibly forever. This came as quite a shock to the WWE universe, because our relationship with him at that time, at best, was pretty sordid. There was a section that loved, but possibly even a bigger section that disdained Roman Reigns for whatever reason. A lot of fans at the time, I believe, just thought that he wasn't ready. And I think there was another section of fans that just thought that they didn't want to be force-fed him, which I understand with both arguments. Be that as it may, the audience really did not know how to take this news. I wasn't sure if this was some kind of bizarre storyline or what. And then in February of 2019, he just all of a sudden returned. This happened just 4 months later. Either way, when the cards are all out on the table, at the end of the day, the head of the table returned to the ring from a possible terminal illness that goes beyond breaking bones. That is just another case of a pro wrestler being not only heroic, not only super heroic and superhuman, but also returning from the impossible. Did you enjoy this video? Make sure to subscribe and leave a like on the way out. Until we see you next time right here on Pro Wrestling Planet.